Welcome to Case of Interest, Kohberger on Newswatch 16, Stacey Lang. It has been a while since we gathered here for one of our Case of Interest episodes for two reasons. First, I took a leave of absence from work. I was on maternity leave over the summer. It was also kind of a dry summer as far as updates in the Bryan Kohberger case in Idaho. The biggest update coming out of the summer is that a trial date has been set. The trial is now set for August, tentatively, in Boise, Idaho. That's a win for Kohberger's defense team. They had asked in the spring for a change of venue to not have the case in Moscow, Idaho. It is going to be in Boise. And we can tell you that Tegna, our parent company, and Newswatch 16 are going to have coverage of that trial when it happens in Boise. Stay tuned for details on how all that's going to work. But we will have the case covered for you when the trial begins in August of 2025. There has been a flurry of documents filed in the last week or so. A lot of that has to do with a court-imposed deadline that we'll get into in a little bit. But the first thing I wanted to talk about was Bryan Kohberger's defense team asked in a very interesting document that we're not going to go into full detail with to have the death penalty taken off the table in this case. So remember when he was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, the district attorney in Latah County said that he would seek the death penalty in this case. So this document is Ann Taylor and the defense team's attempt to get the death penalty taken off the table. And it actually has to do with another high-profile case in Idaho that our viewers in Pennsylvania might not be familiar with, but anyone watching from Idaho will be familiar with the Thomas Creech case. This document, I'm not going to read parts of it because it is very graphic, but we'll include a link so you can take a look at it for yourself if you wish to, that makes the argument against the death penalty. Explain something that we talked about many, many months ago. Last year, in 2023, the courts in Idaho, state courts in Idaho, passed legislation saying that death by firing squad was constitutional in Idaho. And that is because lethal injections, the medication needed for lethal injections in Idaho, were really hard to come by at that time, and I guess still are. So this was basically a second option for prisons to use for executions. And when we talked about this months ago, the belief was it was never really going to be something that would really come up. But in February of this year, there was a failed execution attempt on Thomas Creech. He was not able to be killed by lethal injection. Now, he has a whole separate case that we won't get into, and he's trying to have a stay of execution in his case for a slew of reasons, one of those being that the attempt to take his life several months ago did not work. So that comes up in this document, that it is a possibility, a real possibility, that death by firing squad, if he's convicted and sentenced to death, that's something that Bryan Kohberger could potentially face. So there is a lot of documentation in science included in this document that explains that is what would constitute cruel and unusual punishment. And I just want to read really quickly just the summation and the conclusion of that document right here. That says, there is no humane reason to place Mr. Kohberger into solitary, meaning solitary confinement, as described in his motion to strike state's notice of intent to seek death penalty on grounds of international law, with a promise to kill him just as soon as the people of Idaho can figure out a way that is available, humane. Oh, and I just jumped through here. But it says essentially that does not, here it is, cause a circus outside of the prison. Because if you take the time to read this whole document, there are a lot of arguments why death by firing squad is not humane and constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. So that'll be up to a judge to decide whether everything that's happening outside of the Kohberger University of Idaho case might influence whether or not death penalty is on the table in this case. The other thing we have to talk about is this flurry of documents. If you're checking the Idaho Judicial Case of Interest page, that were filed at the end of last week, because there was a deadline imposed for the defense team to make arguments to suppress any evidence in the case. And they make arguments to suppress lots of pieces of evidence that we've talked about here on Case of Interest that include the DNA sample from Kohberger's father that was collected outside of the family home in Monroe County, the cell phone data that the police argue places Kohberger in and around the King Road house at the time of the murders. Evidence found inside Kohberger's car. And out of all of those documents, one of the most interesting things we found was in a suppression request for certain statements that were made on the night of Kohberger's arrest, which you may remember was December 29th of 2022. Kind of hard to believe that we're coming up on 2 years there. It gives us some details in this document as it lists chronologically what happened that night, but what happened inside the Kohberger family home in Middle Smithfield Township on that night. Some details that we had not heard before. I'll just read these couple of paragraphs for you, and you can take a look for yourself if you wish. On December 29th, they found probable cause. Pennsylvania SWAT began preparations to arrest Mr. Kohberger. Now, this is interesting. Despite weeks of constant FBI surveillance, Pennsylvania law enforcement did their own surveillance starting at 11:15 p.m. that night and Eastern time. And despite the fact that weeks of constant FBI surveillance showed Mr. Kohberger was unarmed, intended to go for runs around his parents' neighborhood, police decided that in the dead of night within his parents' home was the best way to make their arrest. So on December 30th, I apologize, I made a mistake. The arrest was made on the 30th, not the 29th. At 1:14 a.m., Pennsylvania SWAT raided Mr. Kohberger's parents' home. During the raid, law enforcement broke the front door of the home, shattered the sliding glass door of the basement, held the entire family at gunpoint, and seized Mr. Kohberger. Mr. Kohberger made statements to his arresting officers. He was transported to a police station in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, and made statements during transport. At the station, Mr. Kohberger was processed, during which police collected information about his person. Finally, during the interrogation, before requesting an attorney, Mr. Kohberger made statements to interrogators from the Idaho State Police and the Moscow Police Department. And they go on to say that those statements that he made before his Miranda rights were read should be suppressed as evidence. It does not describe what those statements are, if they would be material to the case anyway, but that's just one of the many things that the defense team is trying to have suppressed. It certainly seems like they're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks at this point. So we'll be awaiting any judge's decisions on that suppression information as we move forward. And we're keeping an eye on the case and keeping you informed at every turn. So we hope you'll tune in for the next episode of Case of Interest Kohberger.